The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Mr. Jonas, welcome to the show and thank you for your time.
Elene.
Mr. Jonas, what is this 650,000 lari that the dollars that the government is mentioning?
Yes.
And today the Deputy Minister, Justice Minister, told us that this money will go straight to the state budget and that you are paying it to the state, not the court.
Well,
person.
you know, he told so many lies in his statement that I just listened to in Georgia, and he told so many lies. That's one of them to begin with, and he's a lawyer, and he knows better. Okay, both parties had to advance $650,000 each to the ICC as payment to the arbitrators for their salary and as payment for the fees of the ICC. We made an advance of $650,000. The Georgian government made an advance of $650,000. The arbitral tribunal said that because we did not succeed in our claim, we had to pay the $650,000 for the Georgian government that they paid to the arbitrators' salaries and to the institute. So that means that we are going to reimburse the Georgian government for the $650,000, but it's the payment. It's the same as if we had paid it to the ICC instead of them. So when he says it's a payment to the budget, he's lying, because in fact it is a reimbursement to the government for money that they already paid to the ICC. The important fact here, Elene, is that the $650,000 is a tiny fraction of the legal costs of the government in the case. I am not allowed to say that number. The only thing I will say is that it was many millions of dollars. It was twice as much as our legal fees and costs. Usually the winning party will receive all of their attorney's fees and costs, which in this case was many millions of dollars. The tribunal ruled that this case was so close, and our case and our efforts were in such good faith and so thorough that there was no reason to make us pay the government's legal fees. Now, what's important about that is it shows that when the government says that the tribunal agreed with the government's case down the line and that the tribunal dismissed all of our arguments, that is a lie. They are continuing to misrepresent what was in the opinion. The tribunal said this case was so close, and we respect the efforts of the claimants, us. We are not going to assess the legal fees on them. So let me just tell you that that $650,000 that we will pay to the budget to compensate for what it paid to the ADC is a very small fraction. I can't say the percentage because then I'd be giving away the whole number, but it is a very small fraction of the government's legal fees.
So you're saying that it is, even though ADC lost this case, it is still fair for the taxpayers to cover those costs, and
I
not
think it's terrible.
for ADC
I think it's terrible. Well, it's fair because the government was representing the taxpayers. It's the Georgian government that made the decision to terminate the investment agreement. It's the Georgian government that made the decision to not engage in settlement discussions with us so that this problem and dispute could have been solved outside arbitration. So instead of working it out outside of arbitration, where they would not have run up this large number, I almost said it, this large number in legal fees, and they could have done a transaction involving us and a new investor that would have resolved everything outside the arbitration. Instead, they burned up a very large amount of money fighting this case. And after they burned up the taxpayers' money fighting against us, which is something that they didn't have to do, here we are still sitting with no Anaklia port and also no deep water port at Poti. And it's really impossible to talk about the Anaklia situation and the Anaklia case without addressing Poti as well.
But what about the trust of ADC, whatever ADC has said over these many years that this dispute was in place, because the outcome is still the fact that you lost the case.
Correct. The interesting thing is, and the surprising thing is, that the majority opinion actually does not deny the arguments that we made about the government's misconduct. It doesn't deny that. So again, it's a lie when a government official says that they rejected all of our arguments. They absolutely did not. They rejected two important arguments. They said, okay, maybe the government acted very badly. Maybe the government acted even in bad faith, okay? But that was not the cause of the project's failure. Causation is very important in law. I can say, you did all these bad things to me, and it caused X to happen. And the court can say, yes, I agree he did all those bad things to you, but it's not what caused X to happen. So
what was the cause?
According to the court?
Yes.
According to the tribunal, the cause was that the government set up difficult, even impossible tender conditions to begin with, and that we were foolish, or we took the risk of assuming those conditions. The government always said, and I think this is what's so strange, the government in 2015, 2016 designs a tender, invites participation, negotiates with us, and signs a contract with us, and says we're backing the Anaklia project. But their defense in arbitration was they should never have signed it in the first place. They were stupid. They should never have done a deal with us. And we always thought, what a crazy argument. They involved us in this project, and now they're saying that we should never have done it in the first place. But essentially, the tribunal adopted that argument and said that we assumed the risk that the government had not given us exclusivity, and therefore Poti could develop a competing deep water port, which would ruin equity investor and financial interest in Anaklia. So the first issue was that, that we assumed the risk, and that the cause of the project's failure was nothing that we did or failed to do. In fact, the tribunal recognized how and expressed its respect for all of our efforts to get the project built, but that there was nothing that we could do, and nothing that the government had to do, like provide a guarantee or anything else, to make the project succeed. As long as AP Mahler Terminals continued to have the right to build a deep water port at Poti, and the government was not restricting them from doing that in order to promote Anaklia, there was a market risk that nobody could get past. The interesting thing is that market risk still exists. Right now, the government has retendered Anaklia, has given it to these Chinese companies, and yet AP Mahler Terminals is still saying they're going to build a deep water port at Poti. Those Chinese investors, who I have no affection for, but nonetheless, those Chinese investors should be saying to the Georgian government, wait a minute, what screwed the Anaklia project before is that you didn't give them exclusivity. You didn't sideline Poti. You still haven't sidelined Poti. So the project, this is very important, the project is as likely to fail now with the Chinese investors as it was with us, because Poti is still a competitive and market threat that's keeping other investors away. And the second point, the reason that the IFIs wanted a guarantee was exactly because of this unknown risk on Poti, and I have heard that the Chinese investor is also asking for a guarantee, and an even bigger one than we asked for. So we are in a situation where the government has in no way solved all of the market conditions and structural conditions that the arbitration panel said were the reason why this project failed. The government hasn't solved them. And we don't know whether AP Mahler Terminals is going to really build a deep water port at Poti. So here we are sitting, the government killed the ADC project, the government has not created the conditions for the Chinese project to succeed, and we don't know whether AP Mahler Terminals will build a deep water port. So here we are years and years later with no deep water port on Georgia's Black Sea coast, and that is a huge cost for this country's economic development and jobs.
What the Prime Minister Kobakhidze said today, probably you also listened to that. He mentioned that even the constitution was amended so that the ADC could draw investments for this project.
The government, and all of this is already we've said in public statements, so this is not referring to the arbitration decision. The government did do a lot to support the project until Ivanishvili fired Georgi Kvanchilashvili in May 2018. As we have said, Ivanishvili started to push the POTI project as an alternative, or instead of Anaklia, from late 2017. And then when he actually officially took power as the chairman of the Georgian Dream Party in May 2018, he fired Kvanchilashvili. And the whole tone of the government towards the project changed at that point. So, yes, there was significant support from the government until essentially the spring of 2018. And then from that point, you start to see major interference in the form of granting a permit to AP Mahler Terminals to expand POTI Port,
yes,
which freaked out all of the investors.
But the main thing here is how was that communicated with the arbitration court? Did they differentiate between these nuances that you are now talking about, how the project was being regarded by the government?
Of course,
and all
we
these
made all
changes.
these. Yeah.
And
so
despite that.
The things I'm talking about were, of
case.
course, in evidence in the arbitration case. This was a huge and complicated arbitration case. That's why it took 4 years. The decision took 1 year to issue, all right? There is a dissent in the case. It's 2-1. The opinion is extremely long. There were thousands and thousands of pages of documents, testimony, expert witnesses. It's hard to know exactly what you can say. Very long period of hearings, very thorough process. So absolutely, all of our evidence about the government's misconduct, the things that I'm telling you, which we had also said publicly, that was all put into the arbitration in the proper evidentiary form. And of course, the government did the same thing from their side. The government was very well and very professionally represented, as were we. So all of this was in evidence. And it is very hard for us to understand how the tribunal could have heard and seen all of that evidence, basically agreed that the government was not supporting the project, agreed that the government was at the same time promoting the POTI Port project, agreed that that looked like bad faith, but nonetheless, on the narrow words of the contract, we assumed the risk. That was a technical issue and we had no right to complain. The dissent disagreed with that very strongly and said that the government's conduct undermined the contract with us from the very beginning, was bad faith from the very beginning, and he saw it as a breach of the contract or creating conditions that made it impossible for us to perform.
Ted, you mentioned in the press conference yesterday that the government officials negotiated with you the settlement of the dispute. Why did ADC refuse to that, and what were some of the conditions?
Why did we refuse?
Yeah, or what was the case? Why did you mention this settlement thing? Was it before? Was it within the frames of the? Yeah.
So first of all, before we
and
filed,
what were some of the conditions? Because that might be interesting if you
it's a
can
little bit. This
disclose
is difficult again because of confidentiality issues. I can say clear of confidentiality. From the time I came on the board in August 2019 until we filed the case in the end of July 2020, 4 years ago, we continued to offer, bring investors, make proposals for settlement discussions. Government was absolutely not interested, okay? So we had no choice but to file the arbitration. Once the arbitration started, in approximately late 2020, the U.S. Ambassador Kelly Degnan encouraged the Georgian government to have discussions with us about settling the dispute. She played a very constructive role, Kelly Degnan. And we began discussions. I met with the prime ministers, with Gakharia, and then a video meeting with Kvanchilashvili when he replaced him. And Natia Turneva, who was the Minister of Economy, was designated to carry out these discussions with us. The discussions with Natia Turneva were extremely constructive, meaning that the 2 or 3 issues that the government had said, we can't solve these questions, it's not up to us to solve these questions, and that's why, we don't have to provide a guarantee, we don't have to give you an exclusivity over Poti Port, and that's your tough luck. That's what the government had said before. When we had negotiations with Natia Turneva, all those issues were on the table, and all those issues were actually quickly and easily agreed. She was, however, stopped from, all I can say is that we had an agreement for how we were going to proceed during the summer of 2021 in those settlement discussions, that the government then did not do what it said it was going to do, and the discussions were stopped. Now let me mention something here. Settlement discussions are normally confidential in the sense that they cannot be used in the proceeding, in the arbitration proceeding. So we were not able to talk about this during the arbitration proceeding, but now the arbitration proceeding is over, and those settlement discussions can have no influence on the result of the arbitration. But when the government says, for example, I mean, they say crazy things. Kvanchilashvili's speech yesterday was like the speech of an insane person, or a person who has conspiracy theories in his mind. When they say that we were trying to grab money, we wanted $1.5 billion, all of this was a fraud scheme against the government, they are lying. They know that's not true. Natia Turneva knows very well that that's not true. They know that the actual number of damages, lost profit, that we were asking for is 1/3 of the number that Bregvadze mentioned yesterday. And that...
And Deputy Minister also
correct.
mentioned
they're lying.
$1.5 billion.
Either their lawyers are not doing a good job and not
level.
informing them, or they're lying. But more than that, I said to you on your TV show, I said to other journalists on their show, and I said to Natia Turneva in settlement discussions, what we're talking about is the investment amount. The investment amount of $79 million. The amount that ADC invested in building the Anaklia project, dredging the harbor and everything is $79 million. That number is audited, and that number was accepted by the Ministry of Infrastructure as our valid expenses. For the government to now say things like they put in $3 million, they put in $15 million, it's more lying to the Georgian public. They know, and it's been discussed in every forum, that we had to ask for lost profits because that is the normal request in a breach of contract case like this. But what we are after is to recover the investment, and that's a negotiable number, but that they have always known that what we were after was the $79 million that was the amount of the investment, which was a negotiated number. We would say $79 million plus interest. They might say, your investment's only worth 60 now, whatever, it's a negotiable number. But there was never any desire to pull money out of the budget. Not only were we looking only for the amount of the investment and not a larger number, we also did not want to receive it in cash. And we always made that clear. We don't want $79 million out of the budget. What we want, Georgian government, is find another investor, okay? Find a majority investor, and either we take an interest in the project, an equity interest equal to our investment, proportional, or that investor pays us off. We never wanted to take the money out of the budget. We have been very consistent about that.
What does it mean in your statement that you are disappointed with the decision?
Well,
finally, overall,
of course we
is it
are.
a fair decision? Do you trust the court, and is it a fair decision?
Those are two different, well, basically three. Do I trust the court? Yes, I trust the court. It was a professional, good panel. There's no guarantee one is going to win a law case. I have always said this was a hard case, that it was a 50-50 case, because the contract was very tough on us in terms of shifting the risk to us. On the other hand, the government's behavior was awful, and we could document that the government's behavior was bad, and we could show that the government did not support the project. Our theory of the case was that the government's conduct is so bad that under Georgian law, you have to find that they have breached the contract by their conduct. And the government's position was something not like a Georgian law position, but more like, I would say, English law, saying that, well, you know, the problem is you accepted risks and we had no obligation to help you. You know, so the panel, the arbitration panel, we think it's strange. We disagree with the decision. And again, the dissenting arbitrator absolutely makes this case, which is that it's very weird for the majority to say the government, yeah, we can accept that the government engaged in all this misconduct, but it doesn't even if it was in bad faith, it's not. They didn't have a good faith obligation to help the project or to not develop POTI, this kind of thing. So they took this very narrow view that under the contract you had assumed the risk. And again, there was this causation issue. Look, when I looked at this case and look at this case objectively, there was essentially a pathway for the government to win on the law, and there was a pathway for us to win on the law, and two of the arbitrators agreed with the government. And that's the way it is. And it was always a tough and a close and a difficult case. But when you read, it's interesting that when those of us on our side, and of course we're disappointed and upset because we wanted to win this case, we claimed damages, we claimed breach of the contract, we did not succeed in that. But when we read the case, it's kind of like, well, they understood our arguments. In a way, they basically accepted our arguments. But then they just took this very narrow view that that doesn't constitute a breach of a contract. The dissent points out, and I think that we would point out, that they did not adequately consider the reality of what was going on here, the real context of what was going on here, the importance of government support in a project like this. So it was factors like that. But I want to say something.
So would you say that it was, from this standpoint now, was it right for ADC to create all this buzz and to create the expectations that, you know, the whole geopolitical context of Anaklia port project would be examined at the arbitration court, and that would be one of the main...
First of all, it's a law. They are there to look at law. They're not there to make political decisions.
Definitely.
So I never expected, nobody on our side expected that the arbitration panel would rule in our favor because they saw us representing the West and they saw the GD representing Russian interests or something like that. We never had, you know, we're lawyers, we're professionals. That's not the way you argue a case. That's not the way you go.
So that wasn't in the case as well?
Well, it was we had to explain how did it happen that the Georgian Dream government started out supporting this project and then stopped supporting it. So nobody actually still knows the answer to that question. Was it Russian pressure? We said, yes, it may have been Russian pressure. You and I have talked before that Roman Kakulia, the chairman of the Economic Committee, in January 2020, Georgian Dream senior parliamentarian, said in a television interview that Bidzina did it because of Russian pressure. So there was absolutely evidence including from Georgian Dream's own politicians, that Bidzina was protecting Georgia from Russian pressure by killing this project. But there are other theories about what Bidzina's interest was. He didn't like Mamuka, he didn't like Kvanchilashvili.
But the outcome is what it is.
The outcome is what it is, and I want to emphasize something.
Just 30
seconds. I just want to emphasize here. All this stuff that we're talking about, I'm sorry, is not that important in the public sphere. What is important in the public sphere is that this project still has not been built, and the government is in an absolute mess today in its policy about ports.
That's another thing that we have to discuss.
There's nothing good for the Georgian public or the Georgian voter in where we're sitting right now.
Thank you.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.